phalanges meet your metacarpals, you have condylar joints, but then within the finger is hinge only, bend and straighten. And then the knee. When the knee is really tight, really bent, you can get a little bit of rotation out of it because you've reduced how much of the femur is touching the tibia. You get a little bit of twist, but it's not a major part of the movement. With the knee, it's more the ligaments that restrict it to a hinge because there's not an actual cup of one around the other. A pivot joint, structurally you have a ring around a bone and all it can do is twist in there. The two places we have pivot joints are in the elbow. The radius forms a pivot joint and that's what gives you the wrist twisting. The radius turns against the humerus and there's actually a circular ligament that holds it there. And so you can see the result at the other end where you twist the hand. And then your second joint in the spine is a pivot joint and it lets you shake your head no. And then below that, they're all cartilaginous joints. The last one is the saddle joints. This is kind of between hinge and condylar on flexibility. So it's named for the surfaces being shaped like a saddle. This is a really hard one to illustrate flat. You've got this one curves in that way and out this way. You can maybe see it a little bit better down here. So they're both like that, they cup together, like if you flip the saddle over and put it on top of another one. And what you can get is they can move in two directions. So a little less than the condylar being able to do the full circle. Saddle joints are found in your thumb, not up here, which is condylar, but down where the metacarpal meets the carpal. So you can bring your thumb in and out, forward and back, and kind of pull it across. So it's a little more, it's more flexible than a hinge, but you can't quite go in a circle with it like you could a condylar joint. Questions on types of synovial joints? Joint movements are specific terms we use for what actions a joint can do. There are 17 specific terms, so there's a couple of subterms where you can be more specific. Most of them are pairs of opposites. So if you were looking at if somebody had a shoulder injury or arthritis, you're looking at what kind of movement they've lost. You would measure what angle they can go to for each particular movement. The first grouping is flexion and extension. Flex means you bend it, extension means you straighten it. If you go past straight, which you can do for some joints and not others, then it's called hyperextension. Most of the time, hyperextension can't go as far as flexion. So for example, with the spine, extension is everything in the anatomical position. So if I go like this, everything's extended, which is kind of weird for the shoulders and the ankles, but we'll come back to that in a sec. For the spine, standing up straight is extended. Leaning back would be hyperextension. Leaning forward is flexion. And you can go, most of us can go further bending forward than back. Most of us can't hyperextend elbows and knees. Some people can a little bit, and it wouldn't go anywhere near as far as flexing. The wrist is where it's a little tricky because you can go almost as far in both directions. So you just need to remember that if the palm is coming towards the arm, that's flexion. And if you're going the other direction, bringing the back of the hand towards the arm, then it's hyperextension.
Palm to what?
Bringing the palms, bending toward the palm is flexion of the wrist. Straightening it would be extension. Going past straight, so where your palm is out, is hyperextension.
What happens to the bones if we like crack our knuckles? Like
The bones are fine. Usually what that is, the cracking is either shifting ligaments, like if they're a little offset, or it's popping little air bubbles in the synovial fluid.
but like physically it doesn't do any harm to us?
No. There are certain types of cracking where if you do it a lot, it can loosen the joints, and then they're probably more flexible but not as strong. But there's not like, oh, you're going to get arthritis from cracking your knuckles or something. All right, you have something?
My mom, she can do it to her elbows and her knees, but it like totally just, like backwards.
Oh, wow.
She can just pop her like knees back. I don't have no idea how she does. I didn't know if there was like a reason for that.
Possibly. Is everything really flexible on her?
No, just
No,
her
just
knees and her
those?
elbows. They just like, she can do
Okay.
this and her elbow will literally like, arms like back. Like it's like,
Okay.
I don't know how to explain.
Might be just a little bit of difference in the bone structure then. There are some genetic disorders where the connective tissue is different that make people really flexible. I had a friend in junior high who could bend her wrist all the way back so that her middle finger touched her arm. And there's
That would creep me out.
yeah, it's weird, and and they can do really flexible things, but then they tend to have joint pain later on because while they're more flexible, the joints are weaker because the connective tissue is not holding them together as well.
Okay, another strange question. While we're on like the joints and cartilage and all that stuff, does anybody else have like a bump behind their ear on both of them?
I mean down here?
No.
Oh, actually further up?
Yes.
I do not. Okay, so you're not talking about the mastoid process. There's a muscle with which some people can wiggle their ears. It could be that that's stronger.
No, there's like, I don't know, it's a big bump. It's on both of my ears.
Does it move or is it like part of your skull?
I don't know. You can see it, but it's like, I don't know, it's just like this, it's on both my ears. It's just like this big bump.
Yeah, it might just be, I mean, there's a little bit of a bump for some of the muscles that attach further back. It might just be yours is larger.
I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of individual variation in the details of skeletal bumps and things
I don't
like
think I've
that.
ever met another person that has it. I don't know.
I'll have a look at it later and see if I can figure out one.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know what it is.
Now, the ankle, we're going to come back to because we use special terms for it. The shoulder is where this is really weird. As I said, anatomical position is extension, which means having your arms by your side is extending your shoulders. And then going like this is flexion and hyperextension. Coming forward would be flexion because you can go so much further with it, where back is hyperextension. So that's probably the weirdest one that you have to just remember is the shoulders. Everything else, you look at where can I go further, that one's flexion. For the ankles, roughly 90 degrees, just standing flat, is extension. And then it's a little more fuzzy, what do we want to call flexion and hyperextension? Because we don't really get hyperextension. If you point your toes all the way, you're basically getting 180 degrees, it's straight. So we call that plantar flexion because you're flexing toward the sole, the plantar region. Then when you lift your toes, you bend the top of your foot towards your leg, that's called dorsiflexion. The top of the foot is called the dorsum, even though dorsal means back, and that's because the back of your hand is what's comparable to the top of your foot. So, special terms for the ankle instead of flexion and hyperextension. We have plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. Side-to-side movements are called abduction and adduction. Abduction, like abduct or kidnap, is you're taking a part away from the body, moving it away from the midline. So, spreading your legs apart, lifting your arms to the side. And then adduction, like addition, is bringing the part towards the midline. A trick to remember those, especially if you're a little dyslexic and if you're going through quickly, you're not noticing if that's a B or a D. Look at just the first two letters. Draw a little face on the round one. Is it facing toward or away from the A? And that's the direction the body part is moving compared to the midline. So with our letter looking away from the A, we're moving our body part away from the midline. The letter looking towards the A, we're bringing it to the midline, or at least closer to the midline. Now, for fingers and toes, instead of the midline, we look at just the middle of the hand or foot. So this would be abducting my fingers, and this is adducting. So even though some of my fingers go closer to the midline, some go away, it's still going to be abduction. They're going away from each other. Also shown here is the wrist. You can't abduct it as much as you can adduct it, but that's your side-to-side wrist movements.
What was the hands? The hand out, what?
Apart would be abduction.
We just have to do all the range of motion in our nursing labs.
Ah, okay. So I guess I'm a little behind where
It's
I should be
beyond
for
familiar.
getting you ready for that. Okay. For circles, if you're actually twisting something, that's rotation. So your head anywhere along your spine, shoulders, and hips. Can't really see on the video because it doesn't go low enough, but if you turn your foot, most of that is happening at the hip, and that's rotation. You can specify medial and lateral rotation if you're turning the part toward or away from the midline. Easiest to see if you bend the elbows and do the shoulders. This would be medial rotation, and this is lateral. At the hip, if you turn your toes in, that's medial rotation. Turn them out, it's lateral. The other kind of circular movement is circumduction, where the whole part makes a circle or a cone. And if you look, I can do this with my palm facing down the whole time, so it doesn't require rotation. So your condylar joints can circumduct, even though they can't rotate. Another way to illustrate the difference is if I rotate my shoulder, the marker's staying pretty close to the same spot. But if I circumduct, I make a big circle with it. Your pivot joints and ball and socket joints are the only ones that can actually rotate. But everything except hinge really can at least somewhat circumduct. You can't quite manage it with the saddle joint, but you can do part of it.
Which one does the circumduct?
Everything except for a hinge. And, well, I guess gliding doesn't really do any of the distinct movements. So let's say ball and socket and condylar are the main ones that do circumduction. So then this illustrates medial and lateral rotation, circumduction. There's something I thought was on here, let me check real quick. If it's not, I want to go back to it. Okay. Yeah, I did not include, I want to mention lateral flexion. So if you, and that this applies to the spine. So if you tilt your head to the side or tilt your body to the side, you could sort of call that abduction because it's going out, but the midline itself